Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. Today, I have joining me Bob Gaito, who is the CEO of Auction Central and also the principal at Exit5 Auto Group. How you doing today, Bob?
I'm doing great, Jay. Thanks for having me on.
This is really interesting to me because as we go into this conversation, I know very little about auctions. And so this is kind of a different type of a podcast and one that I think just from my own standpoint, kind of geeking out over in trying to understand that world in a little bit more depth. So before we get into the actual auction side, talk to me a little bit about how you got into this industry. How did you get into the automotive business in general?
Gotcha. Yeah, sure. I mean, so I spent most of my career in marketing services on the software development side, providing digital marketing services. And throughout that career, I've always been a car guy, and somehow stumbled my way into Exit5 Auto Group and the dealership there. And it's an independent dealer. We sell between 60 and 80 cars a month. We have 10 bays, and it's been a great little business. We've been doing that since 2015. And that's kind of how we got into this auction side of things. We were buying cars for our own inventory, as most independents do, right? You don't get as many trade-ins as you'd like, so you're always trying to find cars. And we're going to the physical auctions. And if you think about the timing back in 2015, that's right about when Trade Rev and then ACV and those guys came about, and we were watching that happen, and said, you know what, in my background in the marketing services field, we've built systems that were pretty complex, and we thought we can put our hat in that ring. And really, what drove that is the fact that we wanted to be the auction that provided the most transparency. And I'm not saying that our competitors don't do a good job there too, but that's we're laser focused on that. Laser focused on making sure that the car is as described. So when we get it and our technicians get it, that we know what we think we bought, right? And we're not saddling our techs with ROs that are taking weeks to get done, and causing them pain as well. So we just felt that if we can make a platform that has the quickest time from acquisition to front line, that everybody wins on both sides of the dealership. And that's kind of what we set out to do.
That is really cool. So talk to me about what was appealing about going, and I'm going to touch on the auto group first, the Exit5 Auto Group, because I do think it's interesting. You had that marketing background. What was it that was appealing to, you stated that you're a car guy, but going into the car business, was it surprising how the business was ran, or what were the things that you learned as you entered that side of the business first?
Yeah, it was very surprising. I didn't think enough going into it about how hard it is to get good inventory. The actual selling of the car process, the marketing of that's pretty straightforward. That part's pretty easy. On the service, on the fixed op side, there was a big learning curve for me there, for sure. All right, it's a whole level of technology, a whole level of people and tools and know-how that you have to have, and those people are vital.
Kind of a splash of cold water when you get into the fixed ops world, isn't it?
It sure is. But nothing makes a dealership run better than a good fixed op, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that's the key to the whole thing. If you don't have that, I'm not sure how a dealership can really survive.
So was this an existing dealership that you had bought, or did you start it from scratch? How did
No,
that
it was
work?
from scratch. It was from scratch. So yeah, I mean, so the story goes, I've had a few cars and we've had some success in my other businesses, and next thing you know, I said, you know what, I'd like to get a dealer plate, and then I kind of hooked up with some guys who's been in the car industry for a while. And said, hey, why don't we buy this building? And the next thing you know, here we are, right? So it kind of it evolves quick. But I'm thrilled that we did it, and it's a kind of a way of life for me now at this point.
That is really, really cool. And I think it's very interesting to me to see how you then took that and took the knowledge that you learned there and then really became the source at the auction level, which is kind of mind blowing. I mean, you're looking at
Thank you.
starting two businesses relatively close to one another in terms of age, and I'm sure you've got your work cut out for you. I'm sure you've got a lot going on.
We certainly do. But that's kind of been my background. This will be the fourth business that I've started. Yeah, it is fast paced. There's a lot of what I really like about this too, Jay, is that there's two different businesses, but they're vertically aligned, right? So I really enjoy the fact that hey, we could provide vehicles to our dealership, and at the same time, we're using knowledge that we get in the dealership to make the auction better. So it's really a hand in hand thing, but it is certainly a full day every day.
Did you feel like it was kind of a pipe dream thing at first, and then it evolved from there, or was it something that right from the beginning you thought was realistic, and you're like, hey, we're going to start an auction?
I thought it was realistic, and especially if you look at the track record of ACV or Trade Rev and then ACV and then Backlot, there's certainly a market for this, and more, you're going to see that as younger GMs come and younger used car managers come in, they're going to buy online, right? I mean, I'm not saying the physical auctions are going away. I don't think that's true at all, but there's certainly a migration to that side, and I think there's room for an independent auction house to try and fill that gap. So I think if we look at the big picture metrics, I think it's a very feasible thing to do. It's obviously, it's like any startup, and we're past the startup phase, but it's hard to get that initial inertia, right? And so we've gotten that under our belt now, and now we're looking to just take it north.
So did it evolve from you had the dealership, you go to the auction group. One of the struggles you had at the dealership was getting that inventory. Is it kind of a similar issue with the auction side, or is it just that you put so much more effort into it on that end that it doesn't come as hard to you, or it isn't as challenging as maybe it was on the dealership side?
Well, it's challenging in different ways. So on the dealership side, it's really more about, we're selling to consumers, right? We market to consumers. We're trying to find cars that go in our area. On the auction side, it's a business-to-business type of environment, right? We're signing up dealers. In some ways, that's harder, but in some ways, it's easier in that there's a finite number of dealers in the world, right? And especially if we're going to be geographically centered, right? We have a nice presence in Texas. We have a nice presence in Chicago, and then obviously upstate New York, where we're located. And they're almost kind of independent little pods, if you will, because transportation costs. So if we're saying, hey, we're going to expand in Chicago, there's it's a very focused number of dealers we're going after. So that kind of makes it a little bit easier in that way.
I think it does. It really does. And I think that was when I had first started our business. That's one of the mistakes I made early on, right? Was I went nationwide right off the bat. And I think looking back, it would have been far easier if we would have picked out a couple markets and really, really tried to attack those. So I really respect the foresight that you had in maybe attacking it that way. And I think it's one of those things that I learned after the fact, but a lot of credit to you for understanding that and realizing that up front.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
So let's get into the nuts and the bolts of the auction side, because it is one of those things that I've been at plenty of auctions, have always been curious as to the inner workings of an auction and how you really kind of make that run. But let's start with just the layout of the auction as a whole. So it's a strictly online auction, correct?
Correct.
And go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, so it's online only, and so the way it works is we will call our selling dealers, people that have signed up with us to sell cars, and we'll make appointments to go to their facility and do a condition report. So let's say we're going to call dealer ABC, and they're going to say, okay, yep, we have 10 cars for you. Come on Thursday, we'll give you the keys, and we go ahead and do the condition report. And for us, that's about a 20 to 30 minute process. And I think that when we talk about being transparent, Jay, I mean, this is kind of where it starts, right? We're not trying to go through and see how many cars we can do in a day. It's let's see how good of a condition report we can make. And that involves a few things. Like the first thing we do is we get the keys, obviously. We open the hood and we get inside and do a cold start and a cold start video, right? So we get it started. We let the dashboard settle. We show you what's on the dash. And then we hop out. The hood's already open and we're giving you an audio visual of the engine running. So if there's an accessory noise, if there's a knock, if there's things that you can tell at idle, I mean, we're going to capture that. And then we go around the car twice. Once to take generic photos, what we call the marketing photos, right? It's every badge, every angle, every feature. And then we go around a second time and look for dents, scratches, that kind of thing, on the interior and exterior. We have also partnered with a company called Vintel, and it's been a great partner for us. So it's an OBD to reader, but it's more than just the generic stuff. It's actually, I mean, it's not quite the Snap-on thing either, but it provides a lot more data, right? So it'll tell you, like, it'll check the body control modules. It'll tell you if the rear wiper's not working. It'll tell you if codes have been erased. It'll tell you how many miles ago the codes were reset, if they were, right? And that's an issue, right? Especially in the auction world, because there's really two types of cars that come to the auction. Ones that there's something wrong with and the dealer doesn't want, and ones that are on their lot and they're aged and they're a problem with the floor plan. They got to get out of them, right? I mean, that's the two main sources.
Yeah.
So the former, right, is the car that something's wrong with. And if a dealer is going to go and erase codes, then your used car manager buys that car, and guess what? You as a technician, now you're stuck with this thing that's got 10 billion problems with it, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid. And Vintel has been a big part of that service. And I certainly invite all you guys to. I don't have anything, any stake in their company or anything, but I do invite you to go and check them out. So we go through that process, and we get in the car and we put it in drive, and we don't have a plate on it, right? We're driving around the dealer's lot, so we try and get in second gear. We make sure we get in reverse. I can't tell you if the transmission is going to slip at 55 miles an hour with the full load. I can't tell you that, but I can tell you, all the things that we can see. But it doesn't stop there. So when that's done, that process is done, that report gets submitted real time back to our arbitration team. And the guys that run that team, they're very knowledgeable technicians and service managers from their whole careers. So they'll do things like say, hey, I know this is that GM 6.2 liter motor. I know it's got this kind of thing. Let's make sure we get an audio of that. Or let's look for this rust spot on this Ford, whatever, right? And we can have a second set of very skilled eyes on these reports, and we can change those reports and make comments. And so we go through all that process before that report gets to the selling dealer, that they can put their reserve on it. But now you as a buyer, when you see this car, that it's had two sets of eyes on it. We've done the Vintel thing. We've done the Cold Start video. And, our plan is that you're in a better spot to know what kind of vehicle you're buying. And not to say that cars with things wrong with them aren't a good buy. We just want you to know it. So, when it goes through your shop, your guys know, they can handle this, or, you have time for this, and you have a lift open for, if you're doing an engine swap. Do you have a lift for that? Or are they all used? Right? So that's the kind of information, that's the kind of way we think about the auction, is more than just a acquisition source to peddle cars, but really to try and fulfill the entire process from acquisition to frontline.
I like how you clarify what you don't do as well, right? Where you're not going to take it out and get it up to highway speed, and that's okay as long as, for myself as a dealer, if I know what paces you've run it through, you have an idea of what's covered and what's not, maybe what the risks are of maybe that transmission slipping at 55. At least you have some idea of what it is that you're getting into, rather than like blindly going into the process and you stick hey, I can put $2,000 to $3,000 in this car and still make a profit on it and not really know exactly what's going on with it. And I think that's where a lot of dealers get really upside down on cars and really shoot themselves in the foot, right? Because once you get it in, I think we've all been there where you get the car in, start to dig into it, and it just gets uglier and uglier and uglier. And you want to avoid that situation at all costs.
Exactly. And, I'm not saying that this process is foolproof either, but, it's very much driven towards minimizing those scenarios, right? That's really what it's about.
Yeah. I think from that technician standpoint as well, you said being able to prep yourself for what it is, and hopefully you're not getting a bunch of vehicles that have diagnostic nightmares attached to them, because I think, again, once you start unraveling that and things really start kind of rearing their ugly face, that's when you can get really frustrated, and that's when you just keep digging and keep putting money into it, and maybe you've got that problem where you start throwing parts at it, and all of a sudden you're just way upside down, and that's not fun for anybody.
It's not, and for the smaller dealers in particular, you get 3 or 4 of those cars in a row, that could be catastrophic, right? I mean, it's not the type of expense that you could just slough off and say, I'm going to go make it back in the next one. I mean, certainly you try to, because you have to, but it could be a very serious thing.
This week's episode of Beyond the Wrench is brought to us by Jasper Engines and Transmissions. Okay, your customer's engine or transmission has failed, but now is not the time for them to trade their vehicle. Not without a working engine or transmission. Besides, would they have kept their vehicle another 3 to 5 years if their engine or transmission had not let them down? If you answered yes, then Jasper Engines and Transmissions is your choice to give your customer's vehicle new life and many thousands of miles of enjoyable driving performance. When considering the high cost of a new or newer used vehicle, there's a pretty good case to be made for replacing a drivetrain component that has failed or is delivering poor performance. Rather than trading their car, truck, van, or SUV, install a quality remanufactured Jasper product for less than your customer would have to invest in a new vehicle or a newer used vehicle. Check out their website at jasperengines.com to learn more about the money-saving value of Jasper. So when your team is getting that information back, you do the 2 rounds around the car. What is it that they're looking at when they're getting the information back? Is it just dissecting the information and saying, hey, you know what, the codes were cleared 10 miles ago, there's maybe some type of red flag here? Or how are they dissecting that information and trying to maybe put it in terms that, the normal buyer can understand?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's really a few different components of the condition report. So we'll start with the mechanical stuff, right? So that's kind of what you mentioned. So we do have the Vintel, and we also use a Bosch OBD too. We use both, just in case there's something catches on one and not on the other. But some of the reporting, whether it says, hey, these codes were reset 1 mile ago, and there's some historic codes, we certainly point those out. And then as a buyer, you got to say, look, am I going to take the risk on this one? Right? I mean, and you may, and that's fine, but at least you know. On top of that, then we do that test drive again in the parking lot. So, if there's any major clunks or anything like that, we try and go over some bumps and see if there's any suspension things we can detect. So you're armed with that on top of that. But then there's the smaller things when people don't think about when they think about technicians is, a lot of folks think it's engines and transmissions. Well, no, it's not. What happens when the sunroof doesn't work? Technician fixes that. What happens when the power mirrors don't work? Technician fixes that, right? So we test all those things. So we can say, yes, they all work, or, hey, you know what? The switch for the rear window on the passenger side doesn't work, right? Because that's going to be electronic diagnostics. Now it's probably just maybe it's a switch, but you need to know
Maybe
that
it's more. Yeah,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have some level of game plan going into it, and I'm curious how how the selling dealers take that, right? Because maybe they've been trained a little bit differently than how this approach is. But I've got to think at some level you come to terms with it, and maybe you aren't trying as hard to hide that code, or you're not trying as hard to bury something that shouldn't be buried, right? Like hopefully the transparency leads to maybe a cleaner industry as a whole. Maybe that's a stretch, but I do think the transparency helps.
I do think that, today it's still a seller's market, but when it's a buyer's market, right? Buyers are going to have choice of where they're buying the car, right? So, and sellers, I mean, like they'll run on our platform, and they'll run at Manheim, and they'll run on ACV, the same car, right? So, which is fine. I get it. They want more eyes on their car.
Yeah,
I get it. But as a buyer, you have an option. Where am I going to buy the car from? Where am I going to go look to source my inventory? And there's a few things that I've learned and I've seen is that I think favors this approach. One is that buyers aren't stupid, right? So if they see a car that, is vaguely described and has a check engine light on, or they're going to hit that car for more than they probably should, right? Because they want to defend themselves.
yeah.
But when you know what's really going to cost to recon, and again with the Vintel thing, it will show us, hey, here's the code, but here's the parts cost, here's what Mitchell 1 says for labor, right? So we can get a handle and say, you know what, this makes sense. Like here's an example for you, Jay. If the airbag light is on a car, I'm the buying dealer. I'm going to say, I'm going to hit that for $1,500, or maybe I won't even bid on the car. But if I look at the report and say, oh, it's because there's a low voltage from the battery, and now I can say, well, geez, you know what? I'm back on this car, right? So from a seller perspective, our point is that the more armed the buyer is with real data, the more confidently they can bid, right? Now, if you're a dealer or seller that wants to just push junk and hide it, we're not the auction for you. We're just not.
Yeah.
And you're not going to do well. On the flip side, think about it this way. When a buyer sees a bunch of cars we disclose all this stuff, and they see one that's clean, how confident are they in that car?
Right.
And how much more are they going to get on that car? So, it works both ways. But at the end of the day, we've seen, again, in my marketing background and the services we were in, like you see what Amazon does, right? I mean, if you service the buyer and you're transparent with how things work, you will attract their attention, and that holds true here as well. And if you have buyers' attention, then sellers will want to put the cars on.
I have to assume so much of what you do as an auction, as it relates to branding and how you run your business, is so much around building trust between both sides, right? And being able to make sure that you're confident if you're selling or buying that you're getting as much honesty as possible. Has that been something that has been a challenge for you, just based on, you're a relatively new auction? The auctions have been going on for forever, right?
Right.
Is that something that when you started the business that you looked at and you're like, we got to figure out a way to do this part better?
Well, it is. And, and you're right. So with buyers, every single one that we talk to loves the transparency. How do you not as a buyer?
Right.
Right. That's not hard. It's not hard to get that conversation going. On the seller end, it's a little bit tougher because, some of the other auctions are doing what they can to, get cars, and, they favor big sellers, and there's things that go on, and that's all fine. But at the end of the day, I think if you have a longer term view of it, and you say, yes, I want to build a good reputation for my brand as a seller, because I want these same guys buying my cars, right? It does make sense to just be transparent. And I think some of the bigger dealer groups, I think there's some people that just have that philosophy that's work well for, and there's a segment that they want no part of that, but that's okay. That's okay.
I think it's a really good thing, and I think any business leader goes through this, where you do at some level have to be okay with not being the right thing for everybody, right? And I think the more you can kind of come to terms with that, the more comfortable you are in your own skin, the more it probably makes the customer experience better because you know who your customers are, right? And I do think when you look at any business, that is such an important piece, is just knowing who you are and who your clients are and knowing who might not be a fit, because a lot of times when you do try to fit that square peg in a round hole, it just creates stress everywhere and it's not worth it.
100%. You got to figure who you want to be and then be that person.
But what I'm trying to, where I'm trying to go with this are career opportunities for technicians that they might not even know are out there, if that makes sense.
I see.
So like with you, is it, maybe there's that opportunity to read the diagnostic data or something like that. Am I wrong in assuming that?
No, that's very much a path.
Okay.
So I think, I think there's the traditional career path for technicians, right? So maybe you start as a lube tech or express tech, and you work your way up, and you're a master tech, and at some point, whether you're wired that way to be a shop foreman or you're a service manager, right? I mean, all those things are valid career paths.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a couple of trade-offs. One is, and I don't think enough people understand how demanding the job is to be a technician. I mean, physically.
Yeah.
Physically.
It's hard.
It's very hard. It's hard on your body. I mean, you don't see a lot of 80-year-old technicians for a reason, right?
Yeah.
You can't do it that long. So there's that piece. And, some of those, paths would be, okay, I don't want to do that anymore. I'll become a foreman, or I will, maybe become a service writer, right? And those are all great things. The other side of that is to get into the parts business, right? So you see the guys that are working at a Napa, whether corporately or at a store. I mean, that's certainly one. But at the end of the day, what's very real here is that, I mean, there are billions of cars in this world, and there's always a need for somebody who knows how to fix those. Now, in our particular case, they could become a condition report writer. Now, is that the highest paying job in the world? No, but it's not as demanding either, right? Or you become on the arbitration side, and that's a very valuable spot, right? Because you need to know you're gonna have a discussion with a technician saying, "Hey, this is broke." Well, no, it's not, right? Or here's what it really costs to fix it. And those jobs can pay really well, So I think having that knowledge and having that background, or even the guys that work at Vintel, or the guys that work in some of these AI places that are doing some diagnostics, it's all based on knowing how to fix a car, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a ton out there if you really want to stretch yourself and think outside the box.
Well, it's funny that, and the reason I brought it up in the first place was because I grew up in a shop, started off as a technician, and I think a lot of technicians end up in this mindset to where they don't know all of the other career paths that are out there and really the opportunities that are out there that aren't in a shop. And I think there's, there are a lot of 50-year-old technicians that are saying, hey, my body's starting to break down a little bit. I don't know if there's an opportunity for me within this shop to do something different. And going back to my own experience, one of the things that I think had really, if I were to tell my younger self something, it would be that, there are opportunities beyond, my little family shop in Wisconsin, right? There are a lot of opportunities and things that maybe you wouldn't see, but that your baseline of technical knowledge can take you so far. And something like an auction where maybe it's not top of mind, but there's some really good career opportunities in a space like that to where you can still use that technical knowledge, but maybe back off the physical side a little bit.
Exactly. And that knowledge is, there's only one way to really get that, and that's by really being a tech, right? So you can't just go to college and learn that. You can't.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way. So it's very valuable. It's not like it's not a skill set that you can just easily replace or find somewhere. And again, with billions of cars in the world, I mean, it's a very small talent pool and a very large market.
Yeah. I had to get my little technician slice in there because it is one of those things where, as we try to promote the industry and try to get more people into the industry, I think being able to get visibility to those other opportunities and just know that, there are things outside of just the shop that you can do if you want to use your skill set in a different way. And it's not, I think one of the primary things is just knowing what you like to do, and if you can apply that technical knowledge in a different capacity, I think there's a lot of strength there. So I do want to get back to the auction side, though, because again, some of this is selfish on my part and really trying to understand an auction. And one of the things that you and I had talked about in our pre-podcast meeting here was that trust factor and really being able to build that trust on both sides. We touched on that earlier in the podcast, but one of the things I think is always kind of like that mystery is how you keep that seller out there from bidding up their own vehicle, or really trying to get that honesty in there and not having their buddy in there, bidding up the vehicle so that they're getting a premium price. Of course, both they want a premium price. The buyer wants a deal, and you hope that it goes out and it just runs honestly, but there are some bad apples in the world, and folks that might not run as maybe honestly as they should. What do you see from that side, and what preventative measures can you put around something like that? Because it is really hard, right? I think as well as you run your auction, trying to get that piece down has to be tough at times, but maybe you've got some safeguards in place.
Yeah, it is a real thing, right? I mean, we've all heard stories at the physical auctions about bidding against a Coke machine, right? Raising its hand. But there's some things we can do. So to start with, is our platform won't allow two people from the same dealership or dealer group to bid against each other.
Sure.
Right. So that's a low hanging fruit. We can solve that problem. We have solved that problem. Now, what I can't do is control the fact that you may have a buddy in a different dealership and you call them up and say, hey, put a couple bids in. I can't, there's no way for me to understand how to do that. However, I think if we really look at the scope of things, you really got to understand what you want to pay for the car, what you can pay for the car, what you should pay for the car.
Yeah.
And again, sellers aren't stupid either. They're not going to let a car with an MMR of 10 grand go for 5. And if their buddy bids it up to 8,
they still would have paid 10. Yeah.
Yeah, that may happen. So, there's some people that say, well, yeah, but I could have got it for 5. No, you weren't going to get that car for 5. Right? It's just not going to happen. And if his buddy bids it up to 12, then you shouldn't buy. You should have been out, right? But we try and take away the low-hanging fruit, like bidding within the dealership or within the dealer group, take that out of play. And the rest of it is you just got to be diligent, and understand what the car's value is and bid appropriately.
I think that's totally fair, and I love the fact that you were willing to talk about that piece, because I think that can be a really awkward conversation. I think the way that you just talked about it is very transparent, similar to what you talk about with the rest of your company, right? And I think, again, that's the stuff that builds credibility, it builds trust, it builds confidence in knowing that, hey, you know what? Can we prevent everything? No, but we try our tails off to make sure that we're running an honest auction. I'm really interested to hear if maybe you think there's a component of AI that could help out with that at some point, or do you think there's a potential for AI to help out in the auction space in the future?
Oh, there is definitely. I don't know about on that bidding piece about who's bidding against.
Yeah,
I don't know what we can do there, but there already is some technology that we're looking at and within the car industry. For instance, when we go around the car and we're looking for damage. All right, we'll show you the dent, we'll show you the scratch, right? We have the Carfax, we have the auto check, all that kind of stuff. So you know what you see. But there is AI out there now that will look at that picture and estimate what the body shop cost is going to be, because it's not just a dent, right? It's what's behind that dent,
Okay.
right? So there's some things that are coming to fruition there. There are other ones that, are just trying to find the dent. So it'd be nice, right, if you take a picture of the entire side of the car and come back with, it's got this dent, it's got this scratch, it's got this thing, without the user, like our guy, trying to figure out and look at every single one. Now,
Wow.
that AI is not quite there, and we've tested some of it, and it's decent, but, like black cars are tough. Black cars in the sun are really tough. Black cars in the sun or in the rain are impossible, right? So there's, I don't know if it's quite all the way there, but that is evolving. And there's other AI now that, you drive the car over it and it'll tell you exactly what's going on underneath. So that's an oil leak. Nope, that's a transmission fluid leak. Oh, nope, that's something else. Right? So you can see some of that.
Wow.
And those things are happening. There's no doubt. And, I think like any AI that you've seen even to date, is, whether you love Siri or Alexa or, Chat GPT, they also give wrong answers too, right? They also
Yes.
have their flaws. But, I think in this space with the complexity of these vehicles, AI definitely has a place, and it's going to evolve quick. And we're going to fold it into our auction, right? Because again, all we want to do is show the car for what it is, right? And if we determine that helps us do that, then that's what we're going to do.
As a leader of an auction, does that scare you a little bit, or is it just like, hey, there's some really cool things coming down the road?
Oh no, I embrace it. I think that's the future, and any auction or any business that doesn't look at it that way is gonna die on the vine, I think. So I look at this as more tools, more innovation, more ways that we can inform our audience, and that's what we want to do.
Join top shops, dealers, and schools across the country to promote and improve technician careers. WrenchWay memberships help shops and dealerships engage with schools, improve technician hiring and retention, and make better business decisions with access to useful data. Shops use WrenchWay to build relationships with and support multiple schools on one platform. Show technicians why they're a great place to work. Stay up to date on best practices. Attract passive candidates. Tap into WrenchWay's growing network of industry professionals. And make better business decisions with meaningful industry data. Want to learn more about WrenchWay shop memberships? Visit WrenchWay.com and click on the For Shops tab, or contact us at info@WrenchWay.com. Link is in the show notes.
What are the hard parts about running an auction? I feel like there's so much going on, and there's so much, in terms of the marketing side and making sure, so many people see it, but then also the inventory side. What are the challenges that you see in your day-to-day life running an auction?
Great question. I think it boils down to a couple of different things, and it's not, believe it or not, it's not the technology. It's not that. It's not the marketing side. That's pretty easy to get your hands around, right? The harder part is, especially in a market like we're in today, where cars are, nobody knows where the prices are going, right? They're selling $3,000 above MMR, then they're selling below MMR, then there's a strike, but then there was COVID, and then it's hard to really say, right?
Just a few variables, yeah.
Yeah. But so the hardest part is really trying to get the buyer and the seller on the same agreement of what the car is worth. Like, how many times have you seen a car, right, and they want 150% of MMR? But I want it for more than that. Yeah, but that is not the buyer's problem. That is your problem.
Yeah.
And today, you need to make a decision whether you're going to get out of this car, or you're going to wait until you own it for 180% of MMR, because guess what? It depreciates every week. So there's a lot of folks stuck in that, but I own it more than that mentality. And on the buyer side, it's the exact opposite. I'm afraid of the market, so I need to go really low. So it's just such a disparity. Maybe if we were in a more normal environment, that wouldn't be as drastic as, I mean, it's always there, I'm sure, but it wouldn't be as drastic it is today. But that's very much the hardest part here, is trying to get these two parties to look at the car in the same. Just forget what you own it for. Just like, what do you think it's really worth today?
Right.
Right.
I worked for a dealership. This was on the equipment side, but I gave the dealer principal there a lot of credit because he was a whiz at turning inventory, right? Like his big thing was you turn inventory, and it, similar to what you just said there, it doesn't matter what I've got into it. It matters what somebody will pay for it. And so being able to turn that inventory consistently really created positive cash flow for the dealership, allowed them to go buy better inventory that better fit their market. I think what you're saying in a lot of ways is very similar to what his philosophy was, in that I need to turn inventory. I need to turn it into cash so that I can buy other inventory, and something that will probably move faster than if I were just to sit on this for the next, year and just watch it rot in the lot.
No, exactly. And the other side of that, Jay, is, and I think the really smart dealers think this way, is it also feeds the shop, right? So if I buy 40 cars and I don't sell any because I think they're worth too much money, right? I'm not getting hours for my tax. Right? Yeah. So what you really learn is you need to turn the inventory, because it's a depreciating asset and you need to get it off your books. And you really need to turn inventory because that's what makes the whole dealership flow. Right? We're buying more parts, we're putting more hours in ROs, right? Those guys are getting fed, because if they don't and they start sitting on their toolbox, guess what? They're looking for a job. Right.
100%. And you can create that consistent work. I'm curious as to, I'm guessing that's something you had to learn on the dealership side, right? You had to learn that, hey, that we got to keep our people busy, and not just with busy work, but actually productive work. And if we keep that steady flow going, that technician's going to be happier because they do have work and that they can attack problems. But if they're just sitting idle, that makes them a little antsy, right? That drives a little bit of anxiety. So, I think you're spot on there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think if you look at it this way, like, so, and I bought cars that we were upside down in, right? I mean, it happens.
Yeah.
But you have to say to yourself, like, look, yes, I'm going to lose $2,000 on this car on the front, but maybe I'll sell a warranty. Maybe I'll get some finance revenue. Oh, and by the way, I did hold $500 in the shop. So let me get out of it now. Minimize my loss. Get another car in here. Hold another $500 in the shop. Keep that tech busy, and then hopefully we hit a home run on that one, right? But if you get stubborn and you sit on your inventory, it's just not a good situation for anybody in the dealership. Not for anybody. Not just variable ops.
So in that auction, and say if you're that buyer and you're bringing it back, you've got your game plan of how you're going to fix it. When you're going to that technician, and is your typical buyer, is it a new car dealership, used car dealership, everybody, doesn't matter?
It's everybody, but it's probably leans more on the used car side, independent side.
Okay, so then on the used car side, which is what you have with Exit5, right? The used car dealership side, do you have a reconditioning facility at the dealership along with a normal shop operation, or how does that work in your dealership?
Yeah, we have both. I mean, it's one and the same, right? So, the way I think I see where you're going with this is, how does the auction help that side of it? There's a few things. One is, and again, it's not the auction per se. This is about just managing the dealership, right? So if who's ever buying the cars, whether it's the GM or the used car manager or whoever, if they actually talk with the service manager, right? And when they buy a car and it goes to recon, say, hey man, this had this code. This is a Mini Cooper and it had a misfire. You know what? I can tell you right now that there's a high percentage that's going to need an engine. It is not a coil. It's not a spark plug, right? Hey, if you see that, don't buy those anymore, right? So all of a sudden we have some guys. Or if you see this 60-point leader, we don't want that, especially if it's got this code, right? Or some of the other things we've seen. Some of the codes are on the diesel where they bypass the exhaust stuff, right?
The delete kits, yeah.
So, and hopefully in our auction we're pointing those items out more, so that the buyer can see that and know. Or if it's a case, again, back to the less traditional mechanical, like the sunroof issue, or if it's a Cadillac and the radio is not working right, it's going to need a new radio, right? We just know that's going to happen. So if you see these codes and you see these things and you talk with your fixed op guys, you'll start to see patterns, and you'll know to avoid certain things when they're disclosed, as opposed to going to a physical auction or just buying some off the street where you're like, yeah, no, look like a good deal, man, right? You don't know.
So the communication side is really important from the fixed op side to the buyer, and really trying to be able to point out those things, and the transparency that you've got with the auction really helps arm that buyer along with the feedback from the shop as to whether that's a smart buy or not.
Yes. And if you think about it, we've all seen this where fixed ops and verbal ops, they're mortal, they're enemies, right?
Yeah.
And if we can get over that and find out, and I think that's all pay plan based, right? If you can figure that part out, to say, hey, no, listen, we all should be aligned here, because the more we turn over cars, the faster that happens, the more work we all have.
Yeah.
So let's not fight each other, and let's figure out, like, if I could do my job better as a buyer to help you get cars out front faster, isn't it worth my time to have that discussion with you? Absolutely is, right?
Yeah, and from the dealer's side, I think actually taking what that technician or that service manager says and actually using that information, because if you keep buying cars that technician hates working on and you keep stuffing them down their throat, they're not going to be happy very long, right? Because if you're telling them from a technician standpoint, hey, can we take it easy on these for a while? Like I don't like working on these, and there's some level of, I think, where that can come across as complaining from a technician's end, and it's really easy from the sales end in a dealership to say, just go do your job, fix it, and then we'll turn it around and we can sell it. But if you can actually listen to what they're saying and then maybe implement that or have that in the back of your mind when you are going into that auction, it's going to make the technician's life easier. It's going to get everybody speaking maybe a little kinder to each other, because there is a lot of infighting that happens in a dealership.
There is. And I'm not sure why that is, but that seems like it's always been the way to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But it's not productive for the dealer owner. It's not productive for the service manager. It's not productive for the sales manager. It really isn't. And the last thing you want to do is tie a car up on a lift, or tie a lift up with a car.
Yeah.
If you're in a spot, which most everybody is where lift time is premium, right? So whether it's a certain type of problem that is hard to get a part for, whether it's a certain type of problem that requires 15, 20, 30 hours in the shop that ties up the lift, or whether and which is fine if you think you're making the money on the other end, like everybody's happy with that. And there's dealerships that do really well with that kind of stuff. You just got to know where you fit there, and what makes sense. Ideally, right? I think most techs would say, yeah, I want all the easy jobs that have no rust, and I can book 8 hours on a 4-hour job. We love those.
Yeah.
But the reality is, that's one end of the extreme, and the other end is buying vehicles that really have no business buying or reconning in your shop and keep stuffing them in there. That's the other extreme.
Yeah, it really is. And I think the more you can communicate and actually listen back and forth. You hit that on the head. It just makes for a more pleasant life for everybody involved.
It does.
Now, do you, putting back your dealer hat on, and this might be just good advice from the auction in general, but do you have advice for both the buyer and seller in terms of how they go into an auction? Maybe it's a mindset thing. Maybe it's actually having a plan when you go into an auction, specific type of vehicles maybe that you're looking for. When you look at successful dealerships, what are they doing to prepare when they go to an auction or when they're bidding online?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's definitely about knowing what inventory you're moving and selling, right? And getting through your shop.
Yeah.
So for instance, at Exit5, we tend to do the best with 2018s and 2012 to 18s that are not going to retail more for 17 grand. We do the best with those. Anything newer, they sit on a lot longer. Now, not sure why that is. Maybe it's, hey, if I'm looking for a 20 or a 21, I'm just going to go with the OEM. Maybe that's the case. But we know from our history that that's the sweet spot we live in. And miles isn't the biggest thing, right? I mean, it's not like we have to have 30,000 mile cars. That's not the case either, right? So we kind of know where we fit and we know what sells at our particular lot, at our particular location. And, when we go in for an acquisition strategy, that's what we focus on. And it's tempting sometimes when you see that shiny Land Rover that's 20 grand below MMR, and you're like, man, I think we could do good. I'd advise you not to do that if that's not what your bread and butter is.
Well, I think it fits. I think that's really, really smart just to know what your demographic is. But I also think what you just said aligns with customer buying patterns now too. I think the average age of a vehicle now is nearing 13 years old. Yeah. And so I think the general consumer is more open to buying that higher mileage vehicle and maybe more comfortable than they were 20 years ago, just because in a lot of cases they're just better vehicles now than what they were 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. I think that's true. And if you take the self-driving stuff out of the way for a second, because that's not really a thing yet. I mean, yeah, mainstream. You could buy a 6, 7, 8-year-old car and it's still got nav. It's still got backup camera. It's still got Bluetooth, right? Now, maybe some years ago, if you go back 8 years, you're missing a bunch of those features that people really wanted. But today, I mean, you get a used car that, is aged a little bit, that still has the features you want, and that's I think that makes a big difference too.
I do too. I know just in my personal life, my wife's number one thing she wants is in any vehicle is a backup camera. And you think about that 10 years ago, it wasn't all that common, to have that. And so that is her, we have a young son. That's her number one factor in buying a vehicle, is to make sure it's got a backup camera. Luckily enough now, it's not as big a deal because pretty much everything has it. And I think it was mandated in like 13 or something like that. But it is those things that maybe we didn't take seriously a decade ago to now to where it's like, it's a must have. You have to have it.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I don't know if you knew this, but at least in New York State, if a car, I think it was 2013, so if it came equipped with a backup camera, a dealer cannot sell it without a functioning backup camera.
Yeah.
Can't even sell it. So, I mean, that tells you a little bit about where that's headed. But the point still being is you can get a 6, 7-year-old car with lane departure, backup camera, all those features. And, if it's well maintained, I mean, it looks, you're not ashamed to drive it to the soccer practice, right?
Right.
You're just not. So I think that works.
How, you mentioned like a Land Rover versus maybe buying like a Honda Civic or something like that. I would suck at that part because I would see the cool looking car come through and I'd be all about it. And then like in the back of your mind, like from a business sense, you're like, this is the dumbest thing ever. Why would I buy that?
Yeah, you would be a sucker maybe once or twice, but if it's your money, you learn pretty quick.
So, what do you see as the future of auctions in general? And I know that's a very vague question and hard to answer, but you've obviously been on the forefront of moving it to more online, more an online focus. Do you see that evolving even further? And I know you said there's a place for in-person auctions forever, but what do you see as the evolution of auctions in general?
I think I see a day where they're kind of the same, right? That there's either partnerships or they end up merging. There are people that like to look and touch the car. As an online guy, I'd argue that you get way less information from that than you do the reports that we're generating.
Yeah.
On the flip side, there's something about the magic of the dance at the auction, the physical auction, that people get emotional and they tend to bid more, and that's cool. The downside of that is that it's usually one day a week at a physical spot. So is there room for a hybrid solution? Yeah, I think so. I think the physical auctions also solve some logistics issues, right? So I sold a car and I get it off my lot, right? Or transporting, if we sold 5 cars and the dealer across the street sold 5 cars, and can we get some kind of trucking discount and have the guys go to one lot to pick it up? So I think there's some definite value in that. I think that physical auctions and they're already started becoming a little bit more digital. So I could see a world where they kind of blend together and it's just all under one umbrella.
The auction business in general seems like a fairly stable business, right? Because you're either going, like as you mentioned earlier, you're going to have buyers or you're going to have sellers. You're going to have a buyer's market or a seller's market, but there's always a market for the auction, right? Because there's always a need for really moving cars in general. Is that the case? I mean, is it just one of those things, one of those businesses that just seems to hit kind of that sweet spot right in between, where if you're facing economic headwinds as a nation, it's still strong. If everything's going great, it's very strong. Like, is it as stable as it kind of seems?
I do think it is, and I'll give you an example of why, just from a financial perspective. So if you're a dealer that has a big floor plan, right, or a dealer group even, as those vehicles age and you have to pay down on those, it comes to a point where you need to move that car, right? Just financially, you need to move that car.
Yeah.
And you haven't been able to retail it yet, and you've had all the chances you can to lower the price and do that, right? So you're going to have to get rid of it. So how are you going to get rid of it, right? Well, you can sell it to another dealer or a wholesaler, right? So what the auction provides is any auction provides that platform where there's a competitive bid, right? As a dealer owner, you can say, yep, I'm going to get what I can for this car, and I'm going to be able to turn my inventory because I need to get out. And that need, I don't think, is ever going to go away.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a mechanism for that, and that's what the auction plays, in my mind, anyway.
Are there any maybe disruptors out there, such as, Carvana's had their kind of ups and downs of late? Do you see anything else from the dealer end or how we sell to the end consumer changing in the future?
Well, the end consumer doesn't really impact the auction business too much, right? And to the extent that maybe auctions tend to go in a direction where you can open it up to consumers, but that comes with its own set of nightmares. So.
That sounds like a nightmare.
Between DMV and it's a whole mess of things. But heck, in a way, that's what eBay is, right? I mean, they do some of that. So are buyers, consumers going to buy differently? I think especially on new cars, probably it'll become a little bit more that way. But on used cars, what's really tough is the 2015 Honda that I have and the 2015 Honda down the street are not the same car.
Right.
How are they maintained? Does it rattle? Does it, like, you have to, it's such a mechanical beast that you really gotta be in it and touch it. And I think, certainly you could buy them online, and especially if you're still under warranty and you have those kind of things. But I think when you're looking at those 8-year-old cars that we were just talking about, I mean, I wouldn't advise anybody I cared about to buy a car and not at least drive it.
That's great advice. I've learned a lot about the auction business. It's one of those things that I think is fascinating, and I think what you're doing in general in really driving that transparency, driving that trust, is game changing for that business. So appreciate everything you're doing out there, and thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Really had a lot of fun with our conversation here.
Well, thank you, Jay. I really enjoyed it as well.
All right, and last thing, Bob, where can people find you at?
They can find us at auctioncentral.com. It's very easy. If you're a dealer, it's very easy to sign up. You could do everything right there online, and then we'll reach out to you for the details. And if you're a consumer in Albany, New York, you can come to Exit5 Auto Group or check online, and we'll be happy to hook you up there as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, everybody go check out what Bob's doing, and best of luck in the future, Bob. Look forward to following this along and seeing how everything goes.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jay. Talk to you later.
That wraps up this week's episode of Beyond the Wrench. Be sure to tune in next week for another brand new episode. As a reminder, don't forget to rate and follow Beyond the Wrench on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps us get Beyond the Wrench in front of other fantastic shop owners, managers, technicians, and dealers just like you, so we can continue to help improve, promote, and grow this amazing industry. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week.